The rain hammered against the windshield as Sarah clutched her 6-month-old daughter closer to her chest, watching the mansion's lights fade in the rearview mirror for the last time. Her hands trembled not from the cold, but from the weight of the decision she'd just made. Behind her lay everything she'd thought she wanted: a wealth, security, a father for little Emma. Ahead stretched nothing but uncertainty and the $847 in her worn wallet. But sometimes, love means walking away from everything, even when you have nothing left to walk toward. Sarah Martinez had never imagined her life would take such a dramatic turn. Just 18 months ago, she was a promising journalism student at Northwestern, her future bright with possibilities. Then came the unexpected pregnancy, the father's disappearance, and her parents' cold rejection when she refused to give up the baby. By the time Emma arrived, Sarah had burned through her savings and was working 3 part-time jobs just to afford a studio apartment in Chicago's least desirable neighborhood. That's where she met Marcus Wellington, and not in some fairy tale encounter, but in the most mundane way possible. Her ancient Honda had broken down outside his office building, and while she frantically tried to jumpstart it in the pouring rain with Emma crying in the backseat, he'd appeared with jumper cables and an umbrella. Marcus Wellington, whose name appeared on Forbes lists and whose face graced business magazine covers, had spent 20 minutes in the rain helping a struggling single mother he'd never met. "Let me call you a tow truck," he'd offered, his expensive suit soaked through. "I can't afford one," Sarah had admitted, her pride crumbling along with her resolve. That moment of vulnerability had sparked something neither of them expected. Marcus, despite his wealth and status, was lonely. His world was filled with people who wanted something from him: business deals, investments, social connections. Sarah wanted nothing. She didn't even know who he was. Their relationship developed slowly, carefully. Marcus would stop by the diner where Sarah worked the night shift, always ordering coffee and pie, always leaving generous tips that she initially tried to refuse. He'd listen to her talk about Emma's first laugh, her dreams of finishing college, her fears about providing for her daughter. In return, he shared stories about his own childhood, growing up with absent parents who showed love through trust funds rather than hugs, building his empire from the loneliness that money couldn't fill. When Marcus finally told her who he really was, Sarah's first instinct was to run. She'd seen enough movies to know how these stories ended. The rich man eventually gets bored with his charity case. But Marcus was patient, persistent, and seemingly genuine. He never tried to sweep her off her feet with grand gestures. Instead, he showed up. He held Emma when Sarah was exhausted. He helped with late-night feedings. He made Sarah feel like she wasn't alone for the first time in years. The proposal came 6 months after they met, not in some expensive restaurant, but in Sarah's tiny apartment while Emma slept in her crib. "I know this is fast," Marcus had said, holding a ring that probably cost more than Sarah's annual salary. "But I love you. I love Emma. I want us to be a family." Sarah said yes, not because of the security he offered, but because she believed in the man who'd spent hours assembling Emma's highchair, who'd learned to change diapers, who'd held her during those 3 a.m. panic attacks about the future. She moved into his mansion thinking she'd found her happy ending. The first red flags were subtle. Comments from Marcus's friends about Sarah's background, how lucky she was, how she'd landed well, his mother's thinly veiled disapproval, her suggestions that Emma would benefit from proper influences as she grew older, the way Marcus would grow quiet when Sarah talked about maybe returning to school, his gentle but firm redirections toward topics like redecorating the house or planning charity events. "You don't need to work now," he'd say. "You can focus on being a mom, on us." But Sarah had always been more than just a mom, and she began to feel pieces of herself disappearing into the luxury that surrounded her. The mansion felt like a beautiful cage, and she was losing her voice within its walls. The breaking point came during a dinner party Marcus threw for potential investors. Sarah, trying to contribute to a conversation about urban development, mentioned her experiences living in low-income housing, the perspective she'd gained about what communities actually needed versus what developers thought they needed. The room fell silent. Later, Marcus pulled her aside. "Darling, maybe leave the business talk to me," he'd said, his tone gentle but patronizing. These men respect me because I understand their world. But I have insights too, Sarah had protested. I've lived experiences they haven't. Of course you do, but tonight isn't about that. That night, Sarah lay awake staring at the ceiling of their master bedroom, Emma sleeping peacefully in the nursery down the hall. She realized she'd traded one form of struggle for another. Instead of worrying about rent, she was losing herself. Instead of facing uncertainty, she was facing the slow erasure of everything that made her who she was. The conversation that ended everything happened 3 weeks later. Sarah had been secretly taking online classes, working toward finishing her degree, when Marcus discovered her laptop open to a journalism assignment. His reaction was swift and final. "I thought we agreed you didn't need this anymore," he said, closing the laptop with a sharp click. "I never agreed to stop being myself," Sarah replied. "This is who you are now. This is what Emma needs: a stability, security, a proper home. Emma needs a mother who knows her own worth." The argument that followed revealed truths neither of them wanted to face. Marcus loved the idea of Sarah, the grateful woman he'd rescued, the family he'd always wanted. But he didn't love the real Sarah, the one with ambitions and opinions and a fierce independence that poverty hadn't managed to kill. And Sarah loved the Marcus who'd helped her in the rain. But that man was disappearing behind the billionaire who expected gratitude to translate into compliance. "If you leave," Marcus had said during their final fight, "you'll have nothing. You'll be right back where you started." "Maybe," Sarah had replied, Emma fussing in her arms. "But I'll be me." That was a year ago. Now, Sarah was indeed back where she started, working multiple jobs, living in a small apartment, counting every dollar. But she was also finishing her degree online, writing freelance articles for local publications, and raising Emma in an environment where dreams weren't luxuries but necessities. Emma was thriving too. At 18 months old, she was walking, babbling constantly, and bringing joy to everyone she met, including Mrs. Chen, the elderly woman next door who babysat during Sarah's classes, and Tom, the construction worker downstairs who always made funny faces to make Emma laugh. Life was hard, but it was real. Sarah had learned to find contentment in small victories: a good grade on an assignment, Emma's first word, "Mama," thankfully, a particularly well-written article that earned praise from editors. She was building something authentic, something that belonged to her. Then came the call that changed everything. Sarah was finishing her shift at the diner when her phone rang. Emma was with Mrs. Chen, and Sarah almost didn't answer the unknown number. Something made her pick up. "Is this Sarah Martinez?" The voice was professional, urgent. "Yes, who is this?" "This is Dr. Patricia Williams at Chicago General Hospital. I'm calling about Marcus Wellington. You're listed as his emergency contact." Sarah's legs nearly gave out. Despite everything, despite their painful ending, Marcus had never changed his emergency contact information. "What happened?" "He's been in a serious car accident. He's stable, but he's asking for you." "And?" The doctor paused. "He's asking for Emma." The drive to the hospital felt surreal. Sarah had to arrange emergency childcare for Emma. She couldn't bring an 18-month-old into intensive care, and her mind raced with questions and emotions she'd thought she'd resolved. Why was she still his emergency contact? What did this mean? And why, despite everything, did her heart ache at the thought of Marcus hurt and alone? Dr. Williams met her in the waiting room, a kind-faced woman in her 50s who looked like she'd delivered difficult news many times before. "He has multiple fractures, a concussion, and internal bleeding that we've managed to control. He's conscious, but he's been asking for you since he woke up." "I don't understand why he'd want to see me," Sarah said honestly. "Sometimes trauma has a way of clarifying what really matters," the doctor replied gently. Marcus looked smaller in the hospital bed than Sarah remembered, his usually perfect appearance replaced by bandages and bruises. His eyes, though, were the same, and they filled with something like relief when he saw her. "You came," he whispered, his voice hoarse. "Of course I came." Sarah pulled a chair beside his bed, surprising herself with how natural it felt to be there. "I thought you might hate me." "I don't hate you, Marcus." "I never did." They sat in silence for a moment before Marcus spoke again. "I've had a lot of time to think this past year. About us. About what I lost." "Marcusa." "No, let me say this. I was wrong. About everything. I fell in love with your strength, your independence, your beautiful mind, and then I spent our entire relationship trying to change those things. I tried to make you into what I thought I wanted instead of loving who you actually were." Sarah felt tears building. "We both made mistakes. I made the bigger ones. I let my need to control everything destroy the best thing that ever happened to me. You and Emma." His voice broke slightly. "How is she?" "Emma? She's wonderful. Walking now, getting into everything. She has your curiosity." Marcus smiled despite his pain. "I'd love to see her again, if you'd let me. Not to try to get you back, not to complicate your life, just, I miss her. I miss being part of something real." Over the next few days, Sarah found herself spending hours at Marcus's bedside. He was alone. His parents were traveling in Europe and seemed more concerned about the potential media coverage than their son's condition, and his business associates sent flowers but not themselves. Sarah saw clearly what she'd always suspected. For all his wealth, Marcus was profoundly lonely, but something had changed in him. The accident, he told her, had happened after he'd been drinking, and not heavily, but enough to slow his reflexes when another car ran a red light. He'd been drinking because it was the anniversary of the day she left, and he'd spent it wondering what Emma was doing, whether she remembered him, whether Sarah was happy. "I realized I never even asked if you were happy," he said during one of their conversations. "I just assumed that having everything I could give you would be enough. Things were never what I needed from you," Sarah replied. "I needed to be seen, to be valued for who I am, not who you wanted me to be. I see that now, too late, but I see it." As Marcus recovered, Sarah found herself re-evaluating everything. Not their relationship, as that bridge had been burned by mutual destruction, but her understanding of him as a person. The man in the hospital bed wasn't the billionaire who'd tried to reshape her into his ideal. He was the man who'd helped her in the rain, who'd learned to change diapers, who'd held her during panic attacks. That man had always been real. He'd just gotten lost in his own privilege and assumptions. When Marcus was finally released from the hospital, he asked Sarah to meet him for coffee, a neutral ground, he said, somewhere they could talk without the weight of either of their worlds pressing down on them. She agreed, curious about what he wanted to say. They met at a small cafe copyright near Sarah's apartment, the kind of place Marcus would never have chosen during their relationship. He looked different, thinner from his recovery, but somehow more present than she remembered. "I have a proposition," he said, and Sarah's defenses immediately went up. "Marcus, not that kind of proposition," he said quickly, raising his hands. "A business proposition. I've been following your writing. You're good, Sarah, really good. That piece you wrote about affordable housing solutions was brilliant." Sarah blinked in surprise. She hadn't known he was aware of her freelance work. "I want to fund something," Marcus continued. "A non-profit news organization focused on social justice, community issues, the kind of stories that matter but don't always get told. I want you to run it. I can't accept your charity. It's not charity, it's an investment in something important. You'd have complete editorial control, your own staff, the resources to do real investigative journalism. The only condition is that you never have to see me again if you don't want to." Sarah stared at him. "Why would you do this?" "Because you were right about everything. Because the world needs your voice. Because I spent so much time trying to silence it, and that was the greatest mistake of my life." He paused, looking directly into her eyes. "And because Emma deserves to grow up knowing her mother changed the world." The offer was everything Sarah had ever dreamed of professionally, but it came with complications she wasn't sure she could navigate. "I need time to think about it," she said finally. "Of course." "But Sarah," Marcus reached across the table, not quite touching her hand but close enough that she could feel the warmth. "Whatever you decide about the job, I need you to know something. Losing you taught me what love actually means. It's not about possession or control or even protection. It's about wanting someone to be the fullest version of themselves, even if that version doesn't need you." 3 months later, Sarah stood in the office space Marcus had purchased for the non-profit, watching contractors install equipment and furniture. She'd accepted his offer, but on her terms. The organization would be completely independent, with a board of directors that didn't include Marcus. He would be a silent investor only, with no say in operations or editorial decisions. Emma, now almost 2, toddled around the office space, fascinated by the organized chaos of the setup. She'd started calling Marcus Maka during his occasional supervised visits, and while Sarah maintained careful boundaries, she could see that his relationship with Emma was genuine and healing for both of them. The first issue of their publication, focused on housing inequity in Chicago, was about to go to print. Sarah had assembled a team of passionate journalists, all committed to telling stories that mattered. She was doing work she loved, work that utilized both her skills and her experiences, work that she hoped would make a difference. Marcus kept his distance, as promised, but Sarah would occasionally catch glimpses of him in the neighborhood. He'd moved out of the mansion and into a modest condo nearby, not because he was trying to win her back, he'd assured her, but because being closer to Emma felt important. He was in therapy, he'd told her, learning to understand his need to control and working to become someone worthy of the people he cared about. One evening, as Sarah was putting Emma to bed in their small but happy apartment, her daughter pointed to a photo on the dresser, one of the few pictures Sarah had kept from their time together, showing Marcus teaching Emma to walk in the mansion's garden. "Maka," Emma said clearly, and Sarah's heart clenched. "Yes, sweetheart, that's Marcus," Maka said. Out of the mouths of babes. Sarah looked at the photo, really looked at it. Marcus was smiling in the picture, but now she could see what Emma's innocent eyes had noticed: a sadness in his expression, a longing for something he couldn't quite grasp. That night, Sarah made a decision that surprised even her. She called Marcus. "I want to talk to you," she said when he answered. "Is everything okay? Is Emma?" "Emma's fine, we're both fine, but I think maybe you're not." They met the next day at the same cafe, Tilde Copyright, where he'd offered her the job. Marcus looked nervous, uncertain in a way she'd never seen before. "I've been thinking," Sarah began, "about forgiveness, about second chances, about what it means to love someone." Marcus waited, not daring to hope. "I don't know if we can ever be what we were," Sarah continued. "Too much has happened, too much has changed, but maybe we could be something new, something better." "What are you saying?" "I'm saying that Emma asks about you every day. I'm saying that you've proven you can change, that you can respect boundaries, that you can love without trying to control. I'm saying that maybe we could try being friends, real friends, co-parents to Emma, people who care about each other's happiness without trying to own it." The smile that crossed Marcus's face was unlike any she'd seen before, genuine, grateful, and free of expectation. "I'd like that more than anything," he said. It wasn't a fairy tale ending. Sarah didn't move back into the mansion, didn't marry the billionaire, didn't live happily ever after in the traditional sense. Instead, she built something more valuably, a life that was entirely her own, work that mattered, a co-parenting relationship based on respect and Emma's well-being, and a friendship with Marcus that was rooted in who they both actually were rather than who they thought they should be. A year later, at Emma's third birthday party in Sarah's apartment, surrounded by friends from all walks of life, Mrs. Chen with her homemade dumplings, Tom from downstairs with a handmade wooden toy, Sarah's colleagues from the non-profit, and Marcus, who'd brought age-appropriate books and stayed to help clean up. Sarah realized she'd found something better than her original fairy tale. She'd found her real life, and it was beautiful.